there, welcome back, Banditos. Welcome to another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Warren Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
And this is the Dollar Bin Bandits podcast. And today we are bringing you an interview with another person that I think we consider comic book royalty. It was hard to pick up a comic and not see his name for probably the past 30 years or so. I'm talking about none other than Tom DeFalco. What else can I say about this man's career than damn? I mean, it was such a long career, so many titles, so many characters that he worked with or was involved with in one way or another. And he was an absolute pleasure to talk to. Another one of those people that you can tell he's a fan of comics, he loves what he does, and he has the utmost respect for the field.
Yeah, we just totally scratched the tip of the iceberg with this one because there's so much to talk to him about. So many characters, like Joe said, he worked on. I remember I asked him a bunch of questions about Dazzler. I might be the only person in America who, still thinks about Dazzler, but it just seemed like there were so many big plans going into it, and he broke it down, and it was really interesting to hear.
Big career from Tom DeFalco. Like Oren said, we just scratched the surface. I really loved what he had to say about his time as editor-in-chief of Marvel, specifically a lot of the initiatives and characters that he created, such as the MC2 universe, Darkhawk, New Warriors. He was always pushing for new stuff and new ways of bringing Marvel at that point into the late 20th century. And pleasure to talk to. Really great guy, and has probably a lot of more stories in the can. So another one we'd love to have back. But for now, let's listen to our first interview with Tom DeFalco.
Could you just kind of touch on how you got started in the comic book business?
I got started in probably the weirdest way possible. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. While I was in college, I managed to write and sell some short stories, worked for newspapers, a PR company, the college PR things, worked on a weekly comic strip for a local newspaper. And then when I graduated college, I figured I should get a job because I was of that mentality that you needed a job. And started looking around, went to magazines that I had sold material to. And they said, "You're a writer. You're supposed to stay home and write." But I was still convinced I needed a job. And at some point, I decided to send out resumes to the different comic book companies. And I heard back from Archie, and they invited me up for an interview. And I walked up, big portfolio full of published stuff. And, they gave me a job. So I started at Archie. I think the first day I was opening up mail for Dear Betty and Veronica. and then I progressed from there on in. I proofread, learned. I learned the industry from the ground up. I learned how to do paste ups, which is something that nobody does anymore. Put the logos on the comic book covers with rubber cement, and I learned how to make lettering corrections and art corrections and coloring and all that other stuff. And in the meantime, I just kept bugging the editor by giving him stories, and eventually I wore him down and started to write stories for Archie Comics. From there, at one point I got into an argument with the editor and said, "Oh, I'm gonna branch out." So I got in touch with Charlton Comics, and I started writing stories for Charlton Comics, and then eventually started writing stories for DC Comics, and then started writing stories for Marvel Comics, and chaos ensued from there.
I'm very pleased. I say with Archie Comics, working there, just because they had so many titles and subtitles and all of that, was it like a machine getting stories out there because there were so many books from Archie hitting the market?
Not any more than any other company. I mean, Archie Um, Archie at that stage had a real strong quality control. They still do. The editor read the stories and decided which ones he liked and which ones, didn't quite fit the character. And, sometimes he'd look at a story and read it over. One of my early assignments, well, not that early, but he had gotten this story that he liked it when it first came in, and then it was penciled, and the dialogue, the artist would pencil in the dialogue, and he looked at it and he didn't like the story anymore, so he erased all the dialogue. And he came to me and he said, "Hey, writer, rewrite this. I need you to do a quick rewrite." And he handed me this, I think it was a 5-page story with the characters that were just walking around and every once in a while reacting to a joke. And I looked at it, thought, what the hell? How am I supposed to do? And then created a plot looking at the artwork, which I didn't realize at the time was actually good training for years later when I was working for Marvel. But it's I owe my superhero career to Joe Orlando, who was an editor up at DC, and I was doing some commercial work for Joe. He used to work with Paul Levitz, and did some humor work for DC and a couple of things. And at one point, Joe said to me, "Have you ever thought about doing the straight stuff, which is what we referred to the superhero stuff?" And I said, "Nah, Joe, that stuff looks so hard. I just don't think I'm good enough." And he says to me, "Kid, are you kidding me?" He says, "Here's the deal with the superhero stuff. You got to be able to plot a story. You can plot stories. You got to be able to understand characterization. You understand characterization." He says, "But here's the kicker. It doesn't have to be funny. They're paying you the same rate, and you're only doing half the job." And I kept thinking, it doesn't have to be funny. Yeah, they're paying you the same rate, and you're only doing half the work. And I went, all right, I'm going to take a shot at doing superhero stuff. And started with things like Jimmy Olsen. The first thing I did was a romance story, because they said, it's romance story just like Archie. And I thought, romance story is nothing like Archie. Started with Jimmy Olsen, and then Lois Lane, and then things like Claudia Unconquered, Starfire, and all sorts of nonsense. Always had a great time.
What was it that I think a lot of people, certainly we do, when we hear your name, we kind of associate it with Marvel, and which is awesome. But why didn't you stay with DC longer than you did? Was there just something more attractive about moving on to Marvel, or?
No, DC. I was, at the time I was kind of working on staff part-time at Archie,
okay.
Writing stories for Archie, writing stories for Charlton, writing stories for DC. And DC had what was, I guess they called it an implosion, where they ended up canceling half their line and pretty well put everybody out of work. And I
one of many, apparently.
I was one of the many put out of work. It was very upsetting to me because I showed up Friday to get a very big check, and because I was buying a house on Monday, and I needed that check for my down payment. And I showed up at like 11 o'clock and found out we were all out of work, and the checks hadn't come down. And I panicked. I went to Archie and I said to Archie, "Hey, do you have any, I figured I got to make up this work. Do you have any assignments for you?" The guys at Archie said, "No." He said, "No," the guy at Archie said, "Let me look around, see if I can find something." And I'm a freelancer for many years. I know what that means. And I called Charlotte. I said, hey, you have any work? And let me look around, see if I can find something. Then I called a couple of other things outside the industry. And everybody said to me, let me look around. I'll see if I can find something. And I'm sitting there, panicked. And about 12:30, people came in with all sorts of assignments for me. So I had a bunch of assignments. I went to DC. I finally got my check about 6:30 at night. And I remember at the time, Paul Levitz handed me the check. He said, Tom, we can't use you for a while. Maybe in a couple of months, we'll have a 5-page story for you or something like that. And I thought, yeah, that's okay. You're covered already. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I realized I'd never called Marvel. Anyway, so I went to Marvel, and Jim Shooter said, yeah, we're wondering why you'd never called us. And I said, oh, you have any work for me? He said, yeah, I've got a couple of books for you to write. And then he assigned me, like 2 titles to write, which was good, and eventually offered me, an exclusive writing contract.
That's a pretty great story.
It's
I'm sure looking back now, it's a great story. At the time, you were probably terrified.
well, as a freelance, you spend most of your life terrified. Am I ever going to get another job?
I now you exactly know what that feels like.
It's a weird thing. Even when you're writing books and stuff like that, you have like maybe a 3 or 4 book contract,
Mhm.
and you're thinking, yeah, what if the next book sucks? I mean, because no one ever, no one intentionally ever tries to do bad work.
No.
You're always trying to do the best possible job you can do, and you put your heart and soul into it. And then sometimes you're finishing up something, and you look at it and go, I think this is a piece of shit. There's sometimes you just struggle through saying, I got to finish it anyway. The deadline's coming. I just got to finish it. And then later on, you read the reviews. The best thing this idiot has ever written.
Well, where does Dazzler fall into that? Because that's a character that's sort of found a second life. In recent years, people have really started to come to appreciate the character.
Well, Dazzler, I often think that I was assigned to Dazzler because I had worked on Archie and the Archies and that sort of stuff. And I had worked with, I always forget names and stuff like that. The guy who had invented the monkeys and invented the Archies and
Don
Kirshner.
Don Kirshner.
And I worked with Don with the Archies and stuff like that. I figured, they gave me Dazzler because they were thinking of Dazzler kind of like a Marvel version of an Archie book.
Mm.
And they had me develop the character. I always remember they brought me into a room, and there's a movie guy and a record guy and Marvel licensing and that sort of stuff. And they said, yeah, this is our character Dazzler. Blah, blah. We think Bo Derek is going to be playing her in the movie. I said, oh wow, Bo Derek, because she was really big at that time. And they said, yeah, her power is she's just so beautiful that she compels people to tell the truth. And I said, oh, and I guess my response was very underwhelming. And they said, what's the matter? I said, well, compelling people to tell the truth is not a very visual power. Certainly, certainly won't work in comic books, and I doubt it will work in movies. Mm-hmm. And they said, all right, wise guy. I think it was the record guy. I said, okay, wise guy, what's your idea? And I said, I don't know, Dazzler should have something to do with light. And these guys look at each other as if I was Einstein. Oh yeah, Dazzle. Dazzler, oh yeah, light. Why don't you go with that? And I'm thinking, they think that's a brilliant idea. You bring 1,000 writers in there, and you say characters Dazzler. What do you think our powers are? If 999 don't say light, I'd be surprised. But anyway, I got to develop Dazzler. It was originally a large comic book, 48 pages, supposed to be a super special, but then Marvel decided not to do super specials anymore. And then they put it in a drawer for years. And then they, at some point, decided, hey, we're going to publish it, we're going to split the story in half.
I just wonder, what do you think would have happened if the movie and the tie-in with the record industry, if that had all come together? Do you think, Dazzler would have been the hit that they were expecting it to be?
Who knows? I mean, it's all speculation. You basically, like I said, you put your heart and soul into every character that you release, and some become big hits, and some, just flop, and you have no idea why. I have another long, boring story for you guys. One time, I'm editor in chief, and I, come in from some meeting or something. My secretary says, "You got about 10 retailers have called you. They're all furious." And I thought, why are retailers calling me, and what are they furious about? So as I walk to my desk, another one calls, but it's a guy I know. And I answer the phone. I say, "Hey, what's going on?" He says, you guys really screwed us. You really screwed us. And I said, "All right, what did we do?" A new character appeared in the Spider-Man book, and we didn't tell everybody that it was going to be a really successful character. And I said, "We hope every new character that appears in the book is going to be really successful." It was Carnage. The first issue of Carnage appeared and sold out instantly. And all the retailers were furious because we didn't warn them that they should triple their orders. Yeah. Okay, we're going to introduce another new character next month. Triple your orders. Yeah, like they would have listened to us. But anyway, they all pulled up, and they were all furious.
Do they not know that you can't see into the future and that a particular character is going to be a huge success?
Listen, logic doesn't apply. Hey, if I could have, seen into the future, I would have invested in Apple and Amazon a long time ago.
This is true. I have to say, I think given the, going back to Dazzler, and I'm sorry, guys, I know you guys have your questions, but today, we're in a point in fandom where we're seeing a Moon Knight series on Disney Plus.
Right.
At some point, the X-verse, whatever you want to call it, will be a thing in the world, in the Marvel universe and whatnot. I'm sure there will be a Disney Plus Dazzler series.
Bold prediction, Joe.
I'm just, it's recording. Hold me to it. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
There could be.
I'm sure it will. I'm not,
I'd rather see a Spider-Girl. Disney
well,
Plus
there's
story.
that too. I'm just
and right now, Kristen Dunst and Tobey Maguire are old enough to play the older Peter Parker and Mary Jane.
That's very true.
That is
Wouldn't
very
be
true.
Cool?
With May, yeah. And
Yes.
who would you cast as May?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the young actresses. The 16, 20-year-old actresses that
The teens.
that
Yeah, I don't think we're too familiar with them either.
Yeah.
If we were, we'd be creepy old guys.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
would not work well. So we touched already on, a couple of characters, Carnage and Spider-Girl, that grew out of, what I think you're very well known for after Dazzler, which is your association with Spider-Man and the various sort of Spider series. I'm curious whether, whether you kind of fell into that character and that universe of characters, or if it's something once you got to Marvel, you were trying to, maneuver your way to get to Spider-Man. Like, what was the attraction to that character?
Let me just make something very clear. I fell into everything. All right. There was no master plan. I became an editor at Marvel because Jim Shooter was reorganizing the editorial department. And at one point he said to me, "You used to do editing at Archie." And I said, "Well, yeah, some editing." And he says, I'm reorganizing the editorial department. You want to come on staff?" And I said, "Jim, I haven't had a full-time job in about 5 or 6 years at that stage of the game. I don't know if I could do it." And I really, like being a full-time writer. And he said to me, "Come on, help me out. I just need you for maybe 6 months." And stupidly, I thought, yeah, I can do anything for 6 months. The 6 months, turned into 20 years. I should have shot him. I would have been out, probably in 10. Anyway, when I became joined the staff, Jim said to me, which do you think is the worst comic book that Marvel does?" And at the time I said, "Ghost Rider." He says, "Okay, I'm going to give you Ghost Rider." And I said, "Yeah, okay." And I figured I'd get all the bottom of the barrel things. But he gave me the Spider titles. And I remember looking, I said, "Jim, I'm your newest guy. Why are you giving me Spider-Man?" And I remember he said, "Oh, Spider-Man, it's just like Archie, except with superheroes." And I looked at the characters and said, "Yeah, I guess so. I can do that." And started editing the Spider-Man line, a bunch of other things, and really had a great time doing Spider-Man. And I love the people that I worked with. We're friends to this day. DeMantis and Stern, and was a terrible thing that happened to good old Bill Manlaw. That's how December and I first really became friends. I just had a great time. And then at some point or other, against my own reluctance, I was promoted to be executive editor. And they originally said to me, "Oh yeah, you can still edit the Spider-Man titles." And I said, "Okay, all right, so I'll become executive editor." And then they told me, "No, you can't. You can't edit the Spider-Man titles. You got to supervise a bunch of other stuff." And Danny Fingeroth became the editor of Spider-Man. And then one day, Danny came into my office, and part of my job was to keep track of our freelancers to make sure that our regular people had work. And Danny said to me, "Yeah, I got a problem. Roger Stern has been offered the Avengers, so he wants to leave Spider-Man to take over the Avengers." And I laughed at him. I said, "Only an idiot will follow Roger Stern," because I thought Roger did such a great job on Spider-Man. I said, you are so screwed." And then he says, "Nah, I think we can fix that." And then I pulled off the sheet of writers, and I looked down at the sheet, and I started rattling off names of people who I thought would write a good Spider-Man. And at one point I look up, and Danny's just sitting there with this goofy smile on his face. And I said, "Danny, you're not writing down any of these names?" And he says to me, "Oh, because I already know who I want to write Spider-Man." I said, "Well, if you know who you want, why are you wasting my time?" And he said, "Because I want you to write Spider-Man." And my first reaction was, I can't write Spider-Man. I can't do that kind of dialogue. And he said, "Sure you can." And I said, "No, I can't." And he said, I said, "Well, listen, Stern, plotted 2 issues. Why don't you see if you can script those 2 issues? And if you can, then you stay on the book." And I said, I'll like script the first 5 or 6 pages, and you tell me whether or not I should keep going. And I said, but if I script the first 5 or 6 pages, I expect to be at least paid a kill rate. and then I started on Spider-Man, figuring at any given point they were going to throw me off. So I often laugh that issue 252 was kind of done by 2 fill-in guys. I was just scripting over a stern plot, didn't think I was the regular Spider-Man guy. And Ron Friends, JR had left Spider-Man temporarily so he could, get the X-Men on time. So Ron Friends was kind of a fill-in guy. So 252, 2 fill-in guys, except we ended up to be the regular guys, but we didn't know it at the time.
That's a great story.
That is a really
Two
good
fill-in
story.
guys, yeah. And then you became, such an amazing team after that, not only on Spider-Man but other titles. I find it interesting that you were brought on because of your association with Archie, and I guess the ability to keep things sort of light, which is Spider-Man's kind of MO. And yet, soon into your tenure, they have this big storyline about the black costume, right? and Secret Wars, and sort of taking a dark turn for Spider-Man. I'm very interested in that storyline because I've heard a number of different ways of how things went between Secret Wars and the launching of Web of Spider-Man, and wanted to get your perspective on sort of the chronology of how did the costume come about, and then when did I remember hearing that it was published, or I think the first issue of Web of Spider-Man, it was black costume, and you guys or somebody made a decision, oh wait, we made a big mistake, back to the original costume. And then you're like, oh, and then the fan reaction came and it's back to the black costume.
Well,
Could you sort of clarify how that all went?
all right, we were planning on giving Spider-Man the new costume in Secret Wars, and we're gonna when the characters came back from the I forget what the Beyonders planet was called at this stage of the game, but when they came back, 1 month they disappear, the next month they come back, and there's a lot of differences. And one of the differences, Spider-Man has a new costume. Right? Somehow or other, the fact that we were going to give Spider-Man a new costume kind of leaked to the fan press, and everybody was outraged. This is a terrible thing, sacrilege. And before 252 comes out, all the fans are outraged and that sort of stuff. And one day, the guy from the mail comes up with 1, or it might have even been 2 sacks of mail, and he dumps them on my desk. And then he glares at me and says, I don't know what you did, but don't you ever do it again. And he was a big guy. Anyway, because everybody hated the idea. Everybody's writing in, I'll never buy another Marvel comic book. I'll never buy another Spider-Man comic book. This thing is going to be the biggest disaster in creation. Jim Shooter at one point comes into my office. He says, when does Spider-Man get his new costume? I said, 252. He says, get rid of it in 253. I said, Jim, we can't do that. He says, why not? I said to him, it just doesn't make any sense. He's not going to get it for 8 months in Secret Wars. I think he gets it in, I think it was issue 8. We got to at least keep the costume until he gets it in Secret Wars. And Jim's, oh, no, the sales are going to...
As if on cue.
Sorry about the Flight of the Valkyries. That was my wife calling.
I'm leaving that in, by the way. That was awesome.
Okay. But yes, my lovely wife. I'll pay for that later. Anyway, no, she's very understanding. She is an,
You were talking to who? Who are these guys?
That's what we
But
get
anyway,
at home too.
I convinced Shooter to keep it, but he said to me, listen, if sales on Spider-Man go down, it's your fault and you're going to be fired. And I thought, hey, I'm going to be fired anyway. I'm only doing 251, 252. They're not going to keep me on the book. What do I care? So we got rid of, stayed with the costume. And the sales department, if you notice that around the time that first month with the black costume, we had Marvel Team Up. The regular Team Up guys didn't want to do the book because they didn't want to be tainted by this. So I had to do a plot, and we got Jim Owsley, who later became Christopher Priest, to do the script. Again, filling guys, because regular guys didn't want to do this stuff. And then a couple of months pass. The black costume sells out. We have to go back to press. Everything's terrific with Secret Wars, blah blah blah. And at one point, Shooter says to me, comes in and says, "Hey, the black costume. I hear you're going to get rid of it." I said, "Yeah." We plotted it out. And we're getting. When does that issue go out? I said, next week. And he goes, "You're getting rid of the black costume? Are you crazy?" He goes, "Bring it back." I said, "But Jim, you told me to get rid of it." You misunderstood. I'm bringing it back. So that's why we got rid of the black costume, and then we brought it back. And then we brought it back in a typical Peter Parker fashion. He's switching in between the two costumes. At one point, he goes out with the top of one and the bottom of the other. All sorts of craziness ensued, and we had a good time with that sort of nonsense.
Was the fan reaction was just to the idea of changing the costume, or had the actual costume leaked at that point?
It was the idea of it.
Okay.
See, I'm going to tell you something which, will not surprise you, but comic book fans are a cowardly and superstitious lot.
What?
No.
Yes.
What?
They hate, anytime they hear something is about to happen, they hate it. They hate it.
They're a lot like Star Wars fans.
Yes, and then it comes out and they go, "Hey, this is not so bad." Or they read it, they're reading a series and the comic book comes out, and their first reaction is, "I hate it." The reason why they hate it is because it wasn't the story that they had in their mind. And they also hate the fact that they now have to wait 30 days for the next one. It was funny because the sales department thought that Secret Wars, we kept hearing that these things are not going to sell, and yet the retailers kept ordering more and more copies. They ordered close to 1 million copies of Secret Wars #1. And, we were, sales department saying they're going to get stuck with them. They're going to get stuck with them. We're trying to discourage people from ordering more copies. Do you ever think a company would say that? They're buying too many copies of 252, too many copies of Secret Wars. They're going to get stuck with them. And they said to me, you got to go to California to help the California retailers to sell, because they bought a lot of copies. So the comic book came out on Wednesday. I flew out on Wednesday. I was supposed to go up and down the coast. On Thursday was my first comic book signing. I show up, the store has no copies. It's sold out. The only copies I sign are the ones that people bring back in. I go up and down the coast. No store has any copies, because it's sold out. It's sold out everywhere. It was, it ended up to be a big hit. So people often, talk about this, brilliant marketing thing that we did. We didn't know it was going to work. We thought everybody was going to hate it.
I think
The
that's
retailers
really
actually understood it.
no.
They knew what they were doing.
I think that's hilarious that the most successful moments in comic book history, no one has faith in them, it seems, until after the fact and everyone's losing their minds. and they're like, "This is amazing." You're like, "Oh, okay." And you ask these stories about how did this come about? I'm like, "Oh, well, it was this, just this, and it was just a very type of a situation." And I think it just absolutely hilarious, not hilarious, but just very interesting how these come about. The black suited Spider-Man, death of Superman, any of these big moments in comic book history, and they just on a whim it happens.
Yeah. Listen, Venom, Dave Michelinie described Venom, and when he created Venom, he just thought he was coming up with another Spider-Man villain. He had no idea Venom was going to be the big hit that it was. It's funny when you read the original plot, he describes everything. The way Venom looks and all that other stuff. Todd just followed, Dave's description, and then Eric Lawson later on, he added that tongue, and that's what we think of as Venom.
Yeah, Ron Friends was discussing that once with us, and I didn't really realize how big of a deal that tongue was, and he was going into detail on the design, and just all of a sudden, one issue, this tongue and the exaggerated jawline and teeth and stuff. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah. It's the little things, are the little details of what make or break characters.
One property or character line that you worked on was G.I. Joe, which for us was a big deal, big part of our childhood. Comic books, cartoons, cartoon movies, if you will, toys, obviously. And it was just absolutely fantastic. I mean, that first issue, I think I've owned it at 3 different times in my life. It was given to me by someone who read it and was over it. Then I gave it away. I bought it, lost it, bought it again not too long ago. And it was just absolutely fantastic. Where did you get the inspiration or the ideas for G.I. Joe?
I didn't.
Okay.
All right. I was the editor and supervised the creative team, which basically meant I got to sit down and read what Larry Hama came up with. G.I. Joe, all of the characters, all of the biographies, the breakdown, that's all Larry Hama.
Okay.
Cobra Command, I believe that Archie Goodwin came up with that name. When we first talked to Hasbro explained to me that G.I. Joe was one guy, and he, becomes a sniper, becomes a this, becomes a that, becomes the other thing. And we looked at that and said, all of us just, it was Larry, Archie, Jim Shooter, myself, I think Nelson Yamtorf. We just looked at each other and said, no. It doesn't work that way. You need a team. We're going to call the team G.I. Joe. And they said, but who's Joe? There is no Joe. The team is Joe. And, we somehow convinced Hasbro to go that direction. But the creative force behind that is Larry Hama. I love this, to take credit for all of Larry's work. But I can't, because Larry is one of the unsung geniuses in our field. A consummate professional, a great writer, a fabulous artist, a fantastic editor, and a great friend, a very great friend. So I can't take credit for anything.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's responsible for our childhood.
Yes.
Between G.I. Joe and Transformers, and given
just
the
spoke to I'm sorry, I was just going to jump in to say we actually just released an episode of a conversation with Bob Budiansky, and it seemed to play a similar role for Transformers as Larry Hama did for G.I. Joe.
He did.
And
He did.
it's amazing to think of, all of these huge properties that came out of Marvel and just sort of these, assignments. So it was interesting to hear about that.
Yeah, yeah. Bob's another great talent.
One thing I was curious about is that, compared to, let's say, any of the other Marvel superheroes, G.I. Joe is, they're military. It's a little bit more, dare I say, grounded. I mean, it's a little bit, it's a little over the top, obviously, but it's a little bit more grounded compared to Spider-Man or any of the other superheroes. Were there ever any constraints, or did you have to avoid any type of any content or any, I don't know, like any ideas in G.I. Joe because you didn't want to give, the wrong impression to kids or people reading it? Because it just seems like, certainly now, I mean, that's like the type of thing that people are concerned about. Back then, obviously, certainly much less so. But, given that it is, we're talking about the Army or, military in any form, that, kids can more or less turn on the news and see something similar. Was there anything that was kind of avoided or off limits in that sense?
Not really, because I got, I already knew what the heck he was doing. Because of the anti-war sentiment, when we first did it, we had a lot of reporters saying, "Are you glorifying war?" I said, "No, not really. This is a fantasy adventure, just like Star Wars. But Star Wars doesn't, glorify war." And I said, "Star Wars." And I said, and most people hadn't made that connection.
I mean, they just blew up a planet in the very beginning of the first movie,
yeah,
but whatever.
Yeah, and I said, we have the same kind of faceless enemy. They're not fighting. Yeah, they're not fighting, known terrorists. They're fighting, faceless terrorists. And like I said, Larry, Larry's a very skilled writer. He knew exactly what he was doing. He treated it just like any other Marvel soap opera comic book. People often say that, Stan Lee, his great contribution, Heroes with Feet of Clay. There had always been Heroes with Feet of Clay. What Stan Lee's great contribution to comic books and, I think American literature and movies and that sort of stuff is he brought soap opera to comics. Because we cared about the characters in their lives. We cared about who Spider-Man was dating. Was Ben Grimm and Alicia ever going to get together? Was Reed and Sue ever going to get together? Was Namor going to get? It was the soap opera aspects that Stan Lee brought to comics. And sometimes I look at the current comics and I don't see that soap opera aspect anymore. And I'm thinking, okay, that's why sales are down. People, in my day, you got, kind of seduced by the character. And every month you wanted to find out what was happening, to the character and the character's life. And I wish they would get back to that.
Certainly feels more plot driven nowadays. Like, when are they going to find the thing? And what is the thing going to do to the course of the story rather than, the interior lives of the characters?
Yeah. And, yeah, and I don't want to, I'm an old fart. I'll admit I'm an old fart. You can tell I'm an old fart. But I also think the problem is the stories move too slow. I look at, all of media is speeding up. You watch a movie, and if it's a romance movie, there's something romantic within 1 minute. You're watching an adventure film. I haven't seen the last James Bond film, but I'm sure there was a big scene right in the beginning. All action films start off with a bang. Come on. 30, 40 years ago, I remember an editor saying, you're doing a mystery a mystery novel, you know, I want to see a dead body by page 5. If there's no dead body, I'm not going to page 6, and neither are you. And you know, and I was told that, hey, you got to grab the reader. You know, you're doing any prose work, that first sentence, you better grab the reader by the throat on that first sentence, or nobody's going to go to the second sentence. And these days, you know, I've read, you know, 6-issue story arc, and the story hasn't started by the 6th issue. You know, hey, come on, guys. You know, time is precious. We can always get more money. We can't ever get time. So don't waste my time with a story that doesn't grab me by the throat.
Yeah, I think the word they use nowadays is decompression.
Yeah, well,
Everything is, decompressed.
yes.
Which I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you know, you got to get off the blocks and keep things moving, and then, you know, conclude with a bang. So, but anyway, I guess we're all old farts in that way. I wanted to move to your time as editor-in-chief. So you were elevated to that position in '87. And I was wondering what your sort of frame of mind is during that period. Is it sinking in, like, sort of the responsibility or the legacy of, you know, Stan Lee and the editors-in-chief before you, like Jim Shooter? Or is it really like day to day, just getting the books out on time, making sure problems are solved, that kind of thing?
Well, I became, you know, again, without I don't want to go into, you know, the problems at that time, but I was under the impression that the company was getting ready to make a change. And I was trying to convince Jim Shooter that the two of us should prepare to get fired. And I said to him, we should go to California, because I was doing some work out there, and you know, felt that we you know, Shooter and I could, you know, make money out there. Shooter was convinced that the company couldn't possibly fire him. So I was prepared to you know, go out on my own. I had actually even put my house up for sale, and was in the process of negotiating with a studio, an animation studio, to leave the comic book industry. And then at a lunch, was informed that the company was firing Shooter and putting me in charge, which caught me by surprise. And I remember saying to the president of the company, you know, you guys know that I'm basically a freelancer who masquerades as a staff person, and that my first responsibility is always going to be to the freelancers. And the president of the company said to me, well, that's how it should be. And I thought, okay, okay. So I figured I would try out being editor-in-chief. And I remember taking Mark Grunwald in and telling him the day that I was going to quit. And I had planned to quit after 3 years, but around that time, the company got sold to the Perlman people. And I said to Mark, you know, I'm going to stick around because the Perlman people are going to want to get rid of everybody and put their own guy in charge. So I'm going to stick around. And in the meantime, we're going to position you as their guy. Just took me a little longer to get fired by the Perlman people.
I'm just wondering, not as an editor and as editor-in-chief, you know, there are days that sometimes you have to have a hard conversation with someone, a writer, an artist, you know, a younger person, or, you know, a veteran about their work. And, you know, you want to see changes made, at the same time, you don't want to demoralize them. What was your approach as an editor, you know, talking to the staff?
I always figured honesty was the best policy. I would just be very straight with guys. And sometimes an artist was just getting a little, too wonky in his layouts and that sort of stuff. So I'd, bring him in and we'd sit down and talk, and I'd say, listen, look at your older stuff. You were establishing scenes, you were, doing, and sometimes the guys would say, yeah, but that's a lot of work. It's like, yeah, but that paid off that work. And it'll pay off in royalties here. Don't tell me you don't want to do the work anymore, because I know you care about your work, and most of the time guys would respond to that sort of stuff. I remember when Herb Trimpe started to do his kind of Rob Liefeld kind of layouts and stuff like that. And I said, Herb, Herb, you're Herb Trimpe. You shouldn't be copying. People should be copying you, And he said, but I really like this. I'm really feeling, loose. It's really reinvigorating me, and that, And I said, well, you're telling the stories. If that's what you really want to do, then go with it. But, just remember who the hell you are. And I once had a discussion with Sal Buscema, because Sal started to ink like Walt Simonson. And I said, Sal, you're already signed, you're already Sal Buscema. Why do you have to, we already have Walt Simonson. And he said, I really, this is really reinvigorating me. It's really, helping me out. He says, I love what Walt does. I said, I love what Walt does too, but I also love what you do. And he said, no, I really want to play with this for a while. So I said, all right, the books are still selling, that sort of stuff. But I always said to guys, be yourself. I would often say to artists, look at Kirby and look at how Kirby lays out a story and how he gives you all the visual information, that you need. Ron Friend said to me, the secret of Kirby is figures are design elements. And I said that to artists, and they all say, oh yeah. I don't know what the hell that means, but all the artists do. I said, look from him, understand what he's doing, but don't try to draw like him. Draw like yourself, but understand, the visual vocabulary that we're trying to tell you. Because comic books, I think, a comic book should be like a silent movie. The artwork should tell you everything that's happening, and the word should kind of tell you why it's happening, or add to the story. But it's all story. Blah blah blah. But you talk to guys, you talk to them straight, and every once in a while, guys would. I remember when I was an editor, guys would come in and give me these bullshit explanations on why their work was late. And I used to say, don't use that no editor is going to buy that one. And then, one guy said, I gave him 3 better excuses. And he looked and he says, that's insulting. It's like you think I didn't do the work. And I said, yeah, if you did the work, it would be here. And I know it would be here because you'd be wanting to get paid for it. Don't bullshit. I've been a freelancer longer than you. I know all the excuses. I know all the crap. That guy never worked for me again.
Probably something like that.
It was a mutual decision.
Yeah. Probably for the best.
Yes.
So also touching on, your work as editor and editor-in-chief, was there anything you wanted to bring to Marvel, the content, or change about it, either, the tone or direction of story or anything to that effect? like, did you want to make your time in those roles kind of stick out, or did you just want to make it, let's just make sure that the issues sell, which obviously everyone wants, but did you want to kind of change it up a bit?
You know, yes and no, and the answer is also not really. Spider-Man, I always liked Spider-Man. And I thought, what I needed to do was bring the best people I could to Spider-Man. And I got Roger Stern to write Spider-Man, and I thought he was doing a fabulous job. So you kind of, just let him go. J.R. Jr. was drawing the book. On Team Up, I had Mark DeMatteis, and he was doing, again, a really good thing with the Aunt May and her crowd and that sort of stuff. So you try to bring the best people you can, and you let them go. And if they need, slight tweaks here or there, or something isn't quite working, you say, I'm not sure what you intended to do here with this scene, because it's just not clear enough. And then the guys would fix it and that sort of stuff, because you will make any sacrifice to get the best story you can. And when I became editor-in-chief, what I wanted to do is, I had this concept of a pyramid kind of thing where, you have your basic books that sell at the basic price, and then you keep coming up with things. And I came up with the Marvel Masterworks, which I thought, those things were going for $25 hardcovers. Hey, we're in the real book business. And that's what I wanted it to be. Is I remember at one point I said to Grunwald, we're in publishing, and in publishing you got to think 5 years ahead, and even 5 years ahead it's short-term thinking. I said, but we're going to come up with something the company has never seen before, a 5-year plan. And we came up with this plan, and I remember showing it to Jim Gould, the president of the company. I said, yeah, we're going to do this, and in our second year, we're going to launch a book of teenage superheroes, and in the next year, one of those guys is going to go off in his own title. Well, who are these characters? We don't know. I haven't invented them yet. And he looked at the plan. He says, if you plan 5 years in advance, is this going to work? I don't know. We're going to try it and let's see if it works. And most of it worked. That teenage superhero group ended up to be the New Warriors.
Wow. Okay.
So we work things out, ahead of time and stuff like that. But I wanted us to be real publishers. I wanted to expand our black and white magazines. Mm-hmm. I kept wanting to do a magazine which was half comics and half prose, because I thought, then we could, because in those days there was still a lot of science fiction and fantasy magazines being published. I thought, hey, we can, cop some big name writers to work for us, and then maybe they'll eventually want to do comic books too. And that magazine I could never get off the ground. We did all sorts of other things, like the Star comics and the Barbie comics, and Yuppies from Hell, and I just kept wanting to expand the medium, because I thought, I love the medium, and thought everybody would love the medium if you just created the right product for them. In some regards, we're a little too far ahead of our times, because these days graphic novels are all over the place. They're in schools, they're everywhere. But in those days, we couldn't convince bookstores to carry this stuff.
That's one thing I absolutely love about comics nowadays, is that there's quite literally something for everyone, regardless of how big and popular the character is, or how minute the character is in a particular line or world. I mean, anybody and everybody can jump in or really sink their teeth into any one particular story. And there is just so many particular types of, I mean, I hate to, use buzzwords, but the diversity of the comic book world is just so vast now that, I mean, like, anyone can just jump in and be like, this is amazing. Look, the next guy is probably gonna be like, that's garbage, but someone's gonna love it.
It's really a fascinating thing. In the movies, superheroes are so popular these days. They're popular in everything except comic books. Sales of superhero comic books are not so great. I kind of blame that on the actual material. I think that if they got back to doing one-issue stories and started packing things into those stories, they could, they could win back the audience. Ron Friends and I just recently did a new comic book called The Right Project.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, we have 3 complete stories, 2 11 pages and a 5-pager. We pack more in 11 pages than most guys put in, 3 issues of a regular comic book, because that's how we were trained.
A lot to unpack there. First of all, and I love all of it. The 5-year plan is wonderful. I mean, I've seen that in so many businesses that I've been at, and it gives you, a blueprint, at least something to shoot for. So I think that was, spot on. And the magazine idea is something that just keeps coming back around. Now probably no more, because again, magazines have, mostly gone away. But I actually worked for Marvel for a couple of years in the early 2000s, and one of the projects that I was part of was trying to put together a magazine. It didn't include prose stories and comics. It included sort of comic reprints plus articles. And I thought it was a fascinating project, and of course it didn't go anywhere, but I think it was always sort of this idea that was floated time and time again, that could have worked, I think, but never did, unfortunately. So I wanted to jump with just a few more questions. We want to be mindful of your time, but one of the hallmarks of your reign, I guess, as editor-in-chief, or your management, was the introduction of new characters, which I don't think up till that point had, since obviously the flowering of the whole Marvel universe had not really been sort of crystallized as much as it had with you. So you had New Warriors, Darkhawk, Sleepwalker, the whole MC2 line. Was that, and you mentioned that it was part of your 5-year plan, but was that always something that you really wanted to infuse back into Marvel? This idea of like, there are new characters here. We're not always, always just going back to the tried and true, although we'll always have them. That let's see what we can do about getting some sort of fresh blood in here.
Yeah, if you look at any of my runs, you'll see that I was always creating new characters, because I thought, that Marvel is paying us to be creative, so let's create. My Spider-Man run, which I think a lot of people look back on now with a lot of fondness. We were getting a lot of complaints because we weren't doing the Doc Octopus story. We weren't doing, that. We kept introducing new villains, because I thought, hey, come on, let's put some fresh blood into it. I did the same thing with Fantastic Four. It took a while to get to Doctor Doom. And Thor, we introduced a whole bunch of new characters and new concepts and all sorts of other stuff, because why redo all the old stories? I often resented it, but some new guy would take over a comic book like Captain America. So we do his Red Skull story, do his Cosmic Cube story, and then basically you could guess what the next story was going to be. And it would be boom, 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 you know,
Going down the checklist.
going down the checklist. And, you know, I used to find that very boring. You know, I wanted guys to come in and, you know, and be creative because, hey, you know, we're creative people. Let's create. So, yeah, as a writer, I was always creating new things. And, you know, as an editor, I was encouraging my guys to come up with new things, new twists. And as editor-in-chief, the same thing. You know, I used to, you know, ask this question: what makes this comic book different from every other one? You know, what new thing are we seeing in this comic book? Because if we're not seeing something new in every comic book, then why the hell are we publishing it? You know, I need a new insight, I need a new visual, I need a new character, I need something new, something we've never seen before. And you know, I've had guys say, well, you know, that's hard to do. Oh, yeah, it's hard to do. That's why there are, you know, that's why everybody is not a comic book creator. You know, yes, it's hard work. You know, it's our job to make it look easy, but it's hard work. If you look at my stuff, you know, I structure everything. It's a pain in the ass, but that's what you got to do. You structure every story, and you make it look like, you know, like it was all impromptu. I always maintain that when you do your job really well, you make it look easy. When you look at a bit, you know, some of these home run hitters, these batters that are playing baseball, you know, who can knock the ball to whatever side of the field they want to, they make it look easy. Guys, it takes less than a second from the ball leaving the pitcher's hand to hitting the catcher's mitt. If I want to swing a bat at a fastball, I got to start swinging while the pitcher's in his windup, because I just don't have that skill. You know, when a golfer gets on, you know, a professional golfer gets on that thing and he hits the ball 300 yards, he makes it look easy. You know, sometimes you know, I'm a football fan. You watch some of these passes, they're throwing the football 30 yards down the field to a moving target. They make it look easy. It's impossible to do that. Physics say it can't happen, but they make it look easy. And that's what we have to do with comic books. We have to work our asses off behind the scenes so that it just looks easy. And even more important, when somebody's reading a story, we, the creators, should be totally invisible. It should, you know, one of the things I always loved about the comic books that I did with Ron Friends, that I still do with Ron Friends, is that when people would write letters, in those days they wrote letters, those letters discussed the characters. They never referred to me and Ron. They only talked about the characters. What's happening to Eric, what's happening to Thor, or what's happening to, you know, Peter, Mary Jane, you know, that sort of stuff. You know, we have to suck you guys in. And, somebody once said to me, how can you write these superhero things? You know, I don't believe in heroes. And I said, well, you know, honestly, I don't either. But when I sit down at the I was going to say typewriter, I haven't touched one in 40 years. But when I sit down at the computer, it's my job to make you believe in superheroes. And if I don't, I have failed. If I don't entertain you, if I don't suck you in for 21 pages, I have failed as a creative person.
I want to talk for a second, because you mentioned it. You worked with Ron Friends again. How refreshing is it to have someone who you work with so well that his art can match your words and you guys can put out this? I mean, for us comics fans, it's magic what you guys are doing, but how great is it to have that sort of almost like a creative soulmate?
It's, well, Ron is, Ron Friends is my creative soulmate. We met, many years ago before we even started working together. We went out to dinner, and at some comic book convention started talking about comics and realized, we really like the same kind of comic books. And then when Danny Fingroth, paired us up, we spent a lot of time, talking about the characters, and the stories would just kind of come together. And at some point, I realized Ron's contributing as much to the stories as I was, and it's just a lucky thing. Ron and I approach stories without ego. He'll throw in his ideas, I'll throw in my ideas, and I've referred to us, we're idea factories. We just keep coming up with idea after idea, and ultimately don't give a shit who came up with what. We've been asked to do a Thor story for an upcoming special issue of Thor. It might be Thor 24 or 25. I'm not even sure what the number is. And we came up with an idea, and I'm convinced that Ron came up with the initial idea, and he keeps saying that he thinks I did. But we just start talking, and then this story is going to feature the Enchantress. So we just started talking about Omora, and the story somehow comes together. And the right project, the same sort of nonsense. We're working on Spider-Man and Thor. We just start, banging our heads together, and somehow or other the stories come together, and we're always having a great time, and we're always revising like crazy. I give Ron the plot, and as he's working on the plot, he says, "Hey, this bit that you came up with, it's a very exciting visual." He says, "But what if we did this instead?" And his ideas for visuals are always better than mine, and it annoys the hell out of me. You should have some respect for an old man. Anyway, his ideas are always terrific, and sometimes he comes up with these little clips of dialogue, which I always use because I tell him all the time his dialogue is better than mine, and it's just an amazing thing.
It really is. It really is.
What a collaboration! Yeah.
We just love working together. And we even did a bunch of Archie stories together, and had a great time doing that nonsense. And I'm still doing Archie stories. I turned one in this week. Because I still love comics. I just love the medium, because it's a real team effort.
Do you still follow the comic book world? I mean, I know you mentioned, you certainly have your opinions on kind of the state of comics nowadays. Do you still follow, Spider-Man or any of the other past characters that you've worked on or touched?
Not really, no. Most of the time when I buy a new comic book, I find myself disappointed in the craft. Or sometimes I find myself just confused trying to read the thing. I can understand me being disappointed in the craft. I cannot understand me being confused, because I'm trained in this medium. I've been, this is my 50th year in the comic book biz. I started in 1972.
Congrats.
That's a pretty amazing.
And and guys still ask me to do the occasional comic book story, and I, it's hard to refuse, especially if Ron's going to draw it, or if it's an Archie story. You know, I'm still a sap for this stuff. You know, I'm a lucky guy because I've done a lot of things outside of comic books, which my family is very thankful for.
Hey, look, you know, that Spider-Man stuff is great, but are you going to do something else?
you gotta listen. You gotta make sure that we're financially secure. Anyway, so you know, and I'm just a very lucky guy in every aspect. But you know, I still love comics, and any chance I get to work with Ron, I will. You know, they asked me if I do a Thor story for their anniversary, and I said, you know, it depends. If Ron's up for it, I'm up for it. If Ron had said, you know, he was just too busy, I would have had to pass, because it wouldn't be any fun. You know, but I have a piece of advice for any would-be writer out there. Be a writer first, and be someone who does comics second. I look at the comic book industry these days, and I'm not sure how you can make a living at it. You know, in my day, you'd get on a title, you'd be on the title for 2-3 years. These days, guys get on a title, they're on it for 6 issues, and then they're gone. But if you're a writer, you will always have work, because people always need stories. You know, and again, in my day, there were a ton of places to sell short stories, and a ton of places to sell, you know, novels and that sort of stuff. It's a much more vicious world, but streaming, anybody with a computer can do a streaming show.
That's very true.
You know,
Or you can make a podcast like we do.
Well, make a podcast. I don't know how much money you guys are making on the podcast, but you know.
Oh, tons.
Oh yeah,
We're swimming in it.
Yep.
Listen, guys, I you know, I was always telling writers, make sure you get paid, because if you don't get paid, you're gonna have to go out and get a real job.
Hey, welcome back. So, I got to tell you, we are killing it, and I don't toot our own horn very lightly. I will say that I am so proud of this interview because we had a chance to interview one of the greats. Orrin, you kill it getting our guests every time. Mike, you kill it with your questions, and I kill it just because I have nothing else to say about myself. But that being said, he was great to talk to. I think, you know, again, we say this many times, but in all honesty, and I think the other guys can agree with me, he would have talked to us way longer than we actually did. So it was a real pleasure, and I hope everyone else who listened enjoyed this interview as well.
Yeah, I got a tip of the hat to Mr. Ron Friends, who helped set this up. You heard on this, he and Ron are good pals. They have a wonderful working relationship and friendship as well. So thank you, Ron, for getting us Mr. DeFalco, and we'd love to have you guys both on together.
I can't believe we didn't talk about it, but Spider-Man. This was his the main
did
character.
That. Oh yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
he did that. I mean, that was his main universe, right?
Maybe he'll get a movie.
He did
That's
so
Spider-Man.
much with Spider-Man. Yeah, if you've heard of him, you owe some debt to Tom DeFalco. Anyway, we just love the heck out of this interview, as you can tell, and hope you did too. Please rate, review, and subscribe. That keeps us going. And we will see you next time, Banditos.